big money, big business, is not necessarily going to be harmed by sanctions because sanctions are useless. Bloomberg today reporting that the U.S. government is actually asking big banks to keep working with Russia so that the economy doesn't collapse. Now, isn't that an admission that sanctions are a decorative sham, only made to let politicians grandstand? I would say this is a damning admission of that. Look at from this story from the Bloomberg article today, which, by the way, is very hard to find. Bloomberg has it hidden on their main page. Even if you search it, you have to search specifically the title. I found it very hard to dig this up.
So you mean if you go to Bloomberg and you just simply search Russian sanctions and banks,
this story does not come up. You have to specifically search the title, or I had to search for, because I saw other articles were summarizing this, but not for some reason hyperlinking. So when I went to go look for it, I had to search for either direct quotes or the people quoted in this.
It's amazing. Why would Bloomberg hire reporters then to write stories like this if they're literally going to suppress them?
Well, we're about to see why, because this is damning on the part of the government. So here's what the article says. It says, this exchange, which we're going to show you in a second, puts on display how the country's largest banks are caught in the push-pull between the Biden administration and Congress on sanctions. Behind the scenes, the Treasury and State Departments have urged banking giants, including JP Morgan and Citigroup, to keep doing business with certain strategic Russian firms, according to people familiar with this source. Now, Bloomberg says that this is to avoid mass starvation. Okay. This is what we've been saying too, right? But it's nice that a Bloomberg reporter is actually validating that this is something that could happen.
And that the White House is saying, that it could be mass starvation, right? I mean, this is
Well, we're going to get to that. So Bloomberg is positioning this as a Congress versus the Biden administration type thing, but the Russian sanctions put in place this year were done so by the president under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. So the sanctions are coming from the president. Congress is trying to take some credit for it, but mostly by showboating. But then the Biden administration is secretly sort of undermining their own sanctions for their friends so that big business doesn't fail. Does this make any sense? Listen to Bloomberg's explanation.
What are we seeing in terms of, is this the Biden administration versus Congress?
Yeah, I think in some ways it really does feel like that for these banks. You know, just a couple of months ago, all of the big bank CEOs were on the Hill in front of Congress, and they faced a lot of pushback for continuing to do business in Russia. And a lot of folks were really calling for stronger sanctions, wanting these banks to just do a wholesale exit. And now what we've learned is no, actually, behind the scenes, Treasury and State are really asking these banks to continue to bank certain firms. There's very specific industries that they're really looking at, but they want to see energy prices and food prices stabilize worldwide. And so they're asking these banks to step in where they can.
It's a pretty complicated issue, right? Because it's not just broad sanctions that are making things difficult, but really individual policies that might also be making compliance quite hard.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. A lot of the cases, these are not companies in Russia that are actually sanctioned, but the banks have just done such a broad-based pullback, partly because of their own internal risk and compliance departments. And that's really what you've seen kind of slow things down. And so that's where Treasury and State are trying to say, no, guys, look, this company, these industries really are not under sanctions. We want to see you step in here. We don't want to see a broad-scale pullback. They're trying to avoid things, like mass starvation. They want energy prices to come down. They're trying to really contain some of the adverse impacts that this sanctions regime has had around the world.
So then the president and Congress are giving us this media runaround saying, we don't need Russia, right? We can hit them below the belt. We're too good for them. But then that's just tough talk. And then behind the scenes, they're running to their big banking friends and saying, you can still work with Russia. In fact, we need you to.